All right, part 2, abilities. So in the first video I talked about relics and drawing and how I think people should spend their myth roll and how I intend to. So this one's going to focus on abilities, and I want to keep this as short as possible, so my goal is 10 minutes. So we'll see if I can hit that. But basically what I'll talk about is the abilities that I use and kind of my philosophy as to why, and just kind of suggestions I have in general. So first of all, I use a lot more melee abilities than I do caster abilities, and anybody who I've talked with knows that it's because I go a very heavy bruiser team. So if you look at my black magic, you see I don't have very much. I only have one Fire Up, one Fire Aga, and one Fire Ajan, and I don't use them very much. I typically just throw these onto my healer if I'm looking for some extra damage or something like that. So I really don't use these very much. There are dungeons where you will need these abilities, but I don't use them very much. The physical abilities that I use and that I recommend and that I'm going to focus on in the English version are going to be double cut. You can see I have 3 of those. I have 3 charges, but I kind of wish I hadn't invested so much in charge because I don't really like it. It takes a long time to deal the damage. It's not as much damage as double cut, and jump is the same. I don't use jump even for ranged only bosses because I don't like the extra charge. So I use double cut. I use this one here, Smash Upper. I know that's not available yet, but I think you'll want to invest in this once it comes out because it's basically the same amount of damage as charge, except it's just as fast as double cut, so you don't lose any of that extra time. And here's one that's come out recently that I've started using and I really like. It's probably going to replace double cut, and it's called Dual Delay, and it's basically double cut with a small chance to slow. So this is nice because if you can get this on 1 or 2 of your melees, you can use Dual Delay instead of Sloga on your caster, so that frees up your caster to bring along something else like Protect Ga or Shelga. So it lets you use a bit more defensive abilities and not sacrifice that slow ability. So I'm going to be investing a lot in this, but like I said, this just came out about a month ago. So status ailment ones like blind attacks and silence attacks, I never use those. If I do need to use those abilities, I typically use black magic just because black magic seems to connect more often. I don't have a very high success rate with these blind and silent sword abilities. I've seen some people use salve. I don't recommend it. It's a wasted ability spot. You have a healer anyway. If you're not healing fast enough, then you're probably a bit in over your head, and you should just back out and level up and then go in. Boost. I never really used boost to begin with, but I intend to use it a lot now because I really didn't kind of understand the duration or the multiplier. But even now I see people use boost. It's only one star, so it's very easy to make, very easy to hone, but it's still useful even at high levels. So boost is something you might want to invest in. And then breaks as well. I've talked a lot about breaks, so I won't go into too much detail, but you can see I have a lot of break abilities. So the order that I'm going to recommend there's 2 different recommendations, I'll say. So if you're a heavy melee party like me, you'll want to go power break, magic break, armor break, and then magic armor break. Because in early levels, I'm sure most of you guys know, it's mostly physical damage that everybody does, so you don't really need magic break. It's nice to have. I know Vargas, people are having trouble with Vargas on Final Fantasy VI. His Gale Cut, that's magic damage, so if you do have a magic break, go ahead and try it on him, but most bosses at this point use physical. So that's why you should prioritize that first. Later, you get a lot more magic and a lot more mixed physical and magic damage bosses. So you'll want that second. Now, obviously, then, because you're a heavy melee team, you'll want armor break because you're doing more physical damage, and then magic armor break just, for when you do use mages, or if you want to switch over to a mage heavy team later. Now, if you're somebody who is determined to go and really wants to go a mage build, then I would still keep the first two the same. So still do the defensive ones first, power and then magic, but just switch around the defense breaks. So just do magic defense break and then defense break. So, but the first two should remain the same. Spell blades too. I use spell blades obviously because I'm a heavy melee team. I use spell blades more than I use black magic. So plus later you'll get the raw versions of each. So you'll get Fyra, Blizzara, and Thundara, and those hit pretty nice. So when I have a black mage and somebody like Cloud or Lightning with, we'll say, Fyra and Fyraga will hit for about the same amount as Cloud does with his Fyra blade. So the damage doesn't really change too much anyway, and so those are kind of interchangeable. But like I said, because I use a heavy melee team, obviously I've invested more in spell blades. So summons, I know a lot of people are farming for their summon orbs right now, and I don't think it's a bad idea, especially because you've got bosses like Bygone that everybody's trying to get past, and Shiva would be really good for that because you can do a lot of ice damage to all three parts of his body. That's good, but as you can see, I don't really have a lot invested in summons just because they're nice to have in those situations like Bygone, but other than that, they're not useful. And the reason why is you don't get summon orbs very easily. It's mostly event dungeons, and even if you hone them, they only get one extra use. And the damage is not, unless it's a weakness like Bygone, it's not going to be any more damage than Quake here. So Quake gets 2 extra uses per hone. So you'll actually be able to use more overall AoE with 1 hone of Quake than you will with a summon. So even if you factor in the weakness part, if you were to summon Shiva once, even with weakness, it probably wouldn't do more damage than 2 casts of Quake. So even the overall DPS, I think, is not very good on summons. But, summons are fun. They do have their uses. They're just not a priority for me, and it's not a priority. It's not something I recommend you prioritize. Some summons that come along later that I use a lot and that I really recommend are Kirin, because it's an all-party regen, and Carbuncle, because it's an all-party reflect. So again, these utility abilities, they will be very useful, and they're really, really helpful for a lot of bosses. So sometimes there's even been, in my healer, I'll take Kirin and I'll take a black mage ability for extra damage, and Kirin is enough to regen me through the entire fight because I've broken them and I do 100 or 200 damage per attack, and they're slowed, so you actually regen faster than they can do damage. So even strategies like that work. So yeah, white mage abilities. I've talked a little bit about this before. You'll want one of each status inflict ability. So silence and slow, and for black magic, blind and stuff like that. Because as you guys know, I'm sure there's a lot of clears that require, part of the conditions for victory is blind this person or sleep this person or silence this person. So, and they're good to have, and blind and silence especially, because a lot of magic bosses, you can either silence or you can use reflect. So those are 2 good spells to have. That's why I recommend Carbuncle. Or if it's a physical damage boss, a lot of physical damage bosses are vulnerable to blind. So you blind them, or you slow them, or you break them. If blind lands, though, the other ones don't really matter because they hit you very, very, very infrequently. So those status ones are good to invest in, but really just get one of each and maybe hone it to 4 or 6 uses. There's no need to invest too much in that. And then later you'll get stuff like Protect Ga and Spell Ga. I'm sorry, Shell Ga. You will definitely want this. I've talked about relics in my previous video. So if you have Lunatic High, you have Protect and Haste. If you bring Shelga too, then you have Shelga, Protect Ga, and Haste on your whole party. It's great. Slow Ga is another one that you'll want because a lot of bosses are immune to things like Stop and Paralyze, and even if they're vulnerable to them, they have very short durations. I think it's 10 to 15 seconds, whereas Slow is something like 45. So it's almost double to triple the amount of time of Stop. And, it's more consistent damage reduction overall. So Stop is very iffy. It doesn't hit very often. It's kind of an all or nothing thing. Sloga and Breaks, it reduces their damage over a long period of time. So the overall damage reduction that you can accomplish, I think, is much, much better with Sloga and Breaks. And these, I see almost all the Japanese players use these. I never see Japanese players use Stop or Paralyze or anything like this. This is pretty much the standard that I see in Japan. So that's about it for what I recommend. And, stuff like Bio and Comet and stuff like that, those are good for investing in too, because you do have certain bosses where you have to use non-elemental damage, non-elemental magic, or poison works really well on a lot of later bosses, stuff like that. So one more thing real quick is Death and Break. You should get one of each of these and hone them maybe once. There's a lot of bosses that are either, not, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are a fair number of bosses who are susceptible either to instant KO or Break. So there's been some bosses where I go into the fight knowing that I can't win in a DPS fight, but I'll bring Break because it's vulnerable to Break. I cast Break, it hits on the first time, and I win the fight. So it's even better than Gravity in that regard because it's an instant KO instead of, even half their life. So definitely get one of those. And then really quick, just to recap for you guys, my recommended way of doing AoE is if you're a caster based party, I would go with Quake over Summons, but it's good to have both if you're a very heavy mage party. But like I said, I prefer Quake. And if you're a heavy melee party, you should go with Blade Blitz because this is really useful. There are some dungeons that come later that have 5 mobs in one battle, and you just use Blade Blitz and you take out all 5. Some higher level dungeons, there's only 2, but you attack one, attack the other, and use Blade Blitz to clean both of those up, and it helps you maintain a higher score on your number of turns and the amount of damage you take because you kill stuff quicker. So as a bonus, at the end of this, I'll show you guys some of these ultimate abilities for each section of abilities. So Black Magic, you have Flare, and you have Meteor. I'd really like to see this. I haven't seen this yet, and obviously I can't make it. For White Magic, you have Holy. For physical abilities, you have 3 here. So this is, you attack 4 times at 70% damage. So your overall damage is going to be quite a bit, but just a slightly reduced damage. I haven't seen it in action. I haven't tried it out. Obviously, I can't make it. But, it definitely seems like it would be powerful. And then this one is really cool. So you can take, if you equip this on a character, you can take their soul break gauge and you can use that to charge another character's soul break gauge. So let's say you put this on Tyro, and Sephiroth has his Manamune, and you want to charge his soul break. All you have to do is use this ability to charge his Sephiroth's soul break for an instant soul break. So very cool concept. I'd like to see all of these, but haven't seen that yet. And then this one doesn't really seem worthwhile. It's Quick Trick. Instead of when you select this to attack, it attacks instantly instead of charging that bar a second time to attack. So it's just kind of a quicker way to attack. One quick note here I just noticed is high brakes versus normal brakes. High brakes are obviously more powerful, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with using regular brakes. I still take an extra regular brake into a junction. If I'm going a heavy physical boss, I'll take high power brake and a power brake just to make sure I'm keeping him broken the whole time. And plus, these are a lot harder to hone, so, it's hard to get more uses out of them. So a lot of players still use the regular brakes. So for summons, I think everybody's favorites are Odin and obviously Bahamut, some of the best ones. And for others, Flare Blade. I'd really like to see this one. I think it'd be pretty powerful. But, I think a lot of these ultimate abilities they're out of most players' reach. Like some of these have been around for several months, but I haven't seen anybody get them yet because the materials for them are ridiculously high. And, the damage cap anyway is still 9,999. I've heard, they've said, I believe, that they're going to raise that damage limit, in which case these abilities would be a lot more worthwhile farming for, because you'd be able to do, who knows, maybe 15,000. But, if you hit that cap, then you're wasting a lot of potential damage. And so, yeah, that's the abilities. Hopefully I was able to answer a lot of people's questions and stuff like that. One more quick thing I will say is, when deciding to try to hone, a lot of people say, should I take Blizzara with 4 uses or should I take Blizzard with 8 uses? I tend to take the lower level spells with the more uses because it's more damage over time. And there's, especially if you have break abilities and you're able to heal, there's really no problem taking a little bit of extra damage to deal a little bit of extra damage. And so, otherwise, especially if it's a mage, if you only have 4 Blizzaras and you blow them all on the first, boss, let's say Bygone, then you have nothing left at all for Cognazo, and you're kind of screwed. Whereas if you have 8, you can be a little more generous with how you use your abilities. So I typically will bring, and a lot of times even now, instead of Fire Aga, I'll bring Fyra because I have more hones of Fyra, and it's just more damage over time, and battles last very long anyway. So unless you're really trying to burst somebody down, I tend to take slightly weaker spells with more hones. So that's it. Let's see how I did on time. I apologize for that, but hopefully there's a lot of good information in here. The next one I'm going to do is on characters, and I'll try to keep that one shorter, but hopefully you guys found this helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.